Howdy doody, Cal. How are you?
I am good, man. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Awesome.
This is the Harm Reduction Report.
Yeah, welcome to another episode.
Yeah, this is the place to be. We're back in the studio. Especially funny this time because Noah isn't here, and so of course we had a microphone issue.
Yeah.
Couldn't exactly turn the right one on, so I'm in the little control box looking at Cal through this adorable little window in the studio here.
Yeah, all I see is your head, like a profile picture right there.
And you're underlit with these sweet green LED lights, and so I feel like we're in a very surreal situation.
Yeah, I'm digging the lights here. I'm digging the sort of ambiance in this room.
Yeah. And this is funny because it's like I'm watching you on TV through this window here, and your voice is just coming in so well on the microphones, of course. So anyway, I'm happy we are here. Finally, sort of our first chance sitting down since we returned from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy Conference in Baltimore.
Yes, and that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
It was a great time. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect going in. I mean, I had ideas, of course, and I saw the itinerary, but being there was just a whole different atmosphere, a different feeling, a different connection. Like these, I don't know, I was connecting with these people, human to human. It felt really different than what I was thinking going into it. It was a blast.
Well, what were you thinking going into it? I'm curious because, when we started the Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter at UND, which is also a chapter of the Psychedelic Club, the one real reason when I was trying to find a new president to take over after I was graduating, I was trying to convince you to be interested in this.
Mm-hmm.
And you did all the convincing. You convinced yourself, I think.
Well, you definitely played a big role. I'm glad you kind of reiterated the fact like this is going to be awesome. This is going to be an awesome thing.
Yeah.
Because there were times where I was kind of like, I got schoolwork, I got a lot of stuff going on, but I'm so glad I went. I'm so glad I went.
Yeah, that was really when I decided to to start the chapter a couple years ago. That was really one of the main reasons was they told me that by doing activities as a chapter, we could trade in these activity points for money that would send us to conferences. And so, yeah, like I said before on the show, last year I got to go to San Francisco for the MAPS conference. That, again, is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, who is the 501c3 fiscal sponsor of the Psychedelic Club and a partner with SSDP. I got to go to that conference as a student. I thought that was so cool. And so when I was talking to you about becoming president or being interested in the group, I was saying, like, dude, even if nothing comes of this except you get to go to a conference, that is totally worth it. Even if you do nothing else with the club, if you do enough to go to a conference, then it would have been an opportunity worth taking.
Yep.
And so now we did it. We went to the Students for Sensible Drug Policy Conference in Baltimore. It totally worked. You got enough chapter activity points and you paid for yourself, and you also paid for me, now a lowly graduate, to go with you. And that meant a lot to me, and we did it. And so I'm curious to ask you, how you feel about it. And you said it wasn't quite what you expected, the conference as a whole.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I expected going in, but it blew my expectations out of the water being there. They were very organized. They had a wide range of topics to discuss. The people were very welcoming, and a lot of the arguments really resonated with me. I attended one of these panels. It was about like capitalism and socialism. It was a debate, and one of the board people on the SSDP board were there, and they were saying they intentionally were trying to hire someone. They're trying to hire a diverse panel. People that have conservative political ideas and liberal political ideas, just to kind of capture the entire essence of what society is, what makes up society, to be a representative board. And so that was really fascinating. That was really nice to, I felt so welcome no matter what I believed, what ideas I held and stuff like that. It was so great.
Cool. So in that panel, it really did come across, the debate came out sincerely. And
yeah, it was very sincere. It got a little bit heated between the person, arguing in favor of capitalism versus the person arguing in favor of socialism. It got heated, but they maintained like a respectful stance towards each other and towards the audience and everything. It was awesome. A lot of it went over my head. I'm not an economics major. I don't know a whole ton about politics and stuff like that. But it was sort of analyzing the role that capitalism might play in the drug war, or the role that socialism might play in the drug war, and sort of the pros and cons of each. Like I said, the language was so political. I couldn't quite grasp it all.
Yeah. One political related thing that I learned a lot about at this conference that I wasn't expecting to learn a lot about was, we met someone named Arturo, who was featured in one of the big panels that everybody listened to. And Arturo came from Mexico when he was 4 years old. His parents brought him illegally into the United States. And since then, he's lived his whole life in the United States. He said he watched SpongeBob before school, just like I did. And he is a dreamer, and I don't even know what that acronym stands for. And so, when we're talking about not understanding all the political background, a lot of this was new to me too, like hearing about it. The one thing I did understand about this going into it was that the dreamers, it seems like they are, people whose parents brought them into the country illegally, who've been here since they've come, and they are now being threatened with deportation. And so the thing I learned a lot about these people, I assume they came to the country for a better life. That's like why my ancestors came to this country from Iceland.
Yeah.
But the thing I learned about these dreamers is many of them, Arturo's family especially, were fleeing drug wars from their own country due to crazy bad drug war policies in his country. There were corrupt police doing horrible things to people. There were cartels and bad guys doing evil things to people. And that is why his family was fleeing for their lives, is because of drug war policies in his country. And so he found himself lucky enough to be in the United States. And that never sunk into me before. I was like, well, I'm sure these people are just here looking for a better life, whatever. But it sunk in more like, wow, it's because of bad drug policies. And he explained that once all of these people left, the situation gets worse and worse. And so to send him back now to this place where he's never even been, since he was 4 years old,
right.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't know anybody there. Maybe he has some relatives there, but I don't think he's ever even been there. To send him back would, wow. Because he left, it's gotten worse now. To send him back, it'd be a nightmare. So I don't know. The one question I knew I didn't fully understand coming into this conference, and I didn't know there'd be anything about dreamers involved in it, was why the dreamers don't just become citizens, right? Why they don't go through the legal process or whatever that my ancestors went through to become official citizens. And he just said, like, there's no path to citizenship for me. There's no option because I am undocumented. See, like, if you come legally, he said you have to live here for 5 years as a permanent resident, and then you can qualify for citizenship. But because he's undocumented, it's basically like there's no record of him being here for 5 years, so he's already breaking the law just by being here, so he can't become a citizen. There's no path for him. So that I learned a lot about, because I didn't realize it was just so cut and dry like that. He's like, dude, I want to become a citizen. My whole family wants to become a citizen. Like, we want to stay here. We want to be here. I went to school here my whole life. I'm going to college here. It doesn't make any sense to send me back to a country that has even worse situation with drug policies. And I learned a lot about that, why some of those people come in the first place and why they definitely don't want to just go back. So I was grateful to hear Arturo's story.
Yeah. That was another thing that kind of blew my mind, was seeing all these people, all these SSDP members from around the globe, from different countries. There were a couple people there from the Philippines, who are suffering the rule of Duterte right now and his very radical stance on the drug war, and literally murdering people literally murdering people that use drugs or that sell drugs or that even denounce the violence associated with that. People that are speaking out saying this violence is bad. You should not be doing this. This is not how we address this problem. People are getting murdered for that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy. It was so valuable hearing all these different worldly perspectives like that.
Yeah, that has to be probably the most emotionally charged thing I experienced was talking to the two folks from the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
because they said in the last like a year and a half, I think, or maybe less, 20,000 people have been killed
Yeah.
by police and by vigilantes in the Philippines.
And that number's always rising.
Yeah, 20,000 people. Do you even know how many a day that is? I can't imagine that. And I mean they told stories, people they know, normal, law-abiding for the most part people who were just sitting in their homes. One person, the friend we met, somebody he knew, he was simply taking a bath in his house, and cops just kicked his door down and gunned him to death right in his bathtub.
Yeah, that's terrible. It's easy to, I think, for people to be disconnected from the emotional aspect of that, being so far away and not experiencing that ourselves. But I don't know, when you think about that, when you think about what it's like to be in that situation, like imagine what it would be like to be living there under that threat, under that possibility. It's terrible.
And we assume that would never happen in the United States. That like even I don't know, my parents' friends or people who are generally for the war on drugs
Mm-hmm.
and increasing sentences for drug users and considering the death penalty for people who use and sell drugs, as our president just suggested. They really don't assume that the situation that's going on in the Philippines could ever happen here. But what really struck me was that the people from the Philippines we met, they said, dude, we all felt the same way.
Yeah,
And then it happened.
sure.
And it didn't take long at all. They got a new president who was just really excited about this and made it happen. And it happened big time. And they took everybody off, by surprise. And so that freaks me out. When there's a Facebook page called Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer. And I see people from North Dakota posting on this and making comments like that. You can see people wearing T-shirts that say "Kill Your Local Heroin Dealer," and like they're making jokes of it, and like they really do think that their allegedly druggy neighbors on the corner, that cops should just go in there and gun them all down. Like I hear North Dakotans say stuff like that sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds almost, I don't know. I guess some of them would say, "Oh, don't mean it. I'm joking or
Yeah.
something." But I don't think it's very funny because it's happening in other countries right now today.
Yeah, it hits home. I would be dead under, if I was living in the Philippines. Like I mentioned many times, I was a drug user. I was a drug addict. I had an addiction, and that could very easily have happened to me under those circumstances.
That's nuts, dude. And just think, like, would the world have been better if cops had burst into your apartment 6 years ago and killed you? I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
It would leave a lot of heartache. First of all, it would eliminate my potential. I could never reach my potential. I'd be dead. I could never pursue my dreams and my goals to contribute back to the community and to do something valuable with my life, which is what a lot of people using drugs or having addictions, deep down are striving to do. It would result in heartache. My family would be torn apart about it. They would be living under this oppression and having these just this terrible heartache. Their work would suffer. As doctors, they would suffer with the loss of a child, and it'd just be bad. It'd be bad all around.
So bad, dude. And especially, look at you today. By nobody's standards would anybody say that you deserve to have the police, erase you from this world.
Right.
I mean, no way. And that would just be a tragedy. And that's what's happening to people right now in the Philippines. So it was so cool to meet them because they were younger than me. They're college students, and they're like, "Yo, we came here from the Philippines. This is what's going on. I know you've heard about it, but let me actually tell you about it."
Yeah.
And that was like, wow.
Yeah, they kind of painted a story very, very accurate and very firsthand.
And they said, like, I'm afraid to go back home because if the government know that we came here to America to talk about our president and his war on drugs and all the people, people are being killed for speaking out about it.
Yeah.
So they've traveled all the way here to speak out about it anyway.
That's very courageous. They're
And
brave. They're
very brave.
Yeah, putting themselves in danger to overcome this thing that needs to be overcome.
Yes, Arturo as well. He's not supposed to talk about this. I mean, that was the biggest part of his speech was, he said there are plenty of dreamers like me who, for really all basic reasons, should have a path to citizenship, but don't. And none of us are allowed to talk about it because if we talk about it, then we could draw attention to ourselves, and any number of law enforcement agencies could decide to target us and deport us. And so it was so cool to just hear him talk about it anyway.
Yeah.
And he really taught me something. And if he hadn't chosen to speak up, I would be living a more ignorant life right now about this topic.
Yeah.
And so it's so brave of him. And he knew from the very beginning, like, that this is a serious thing, and he's risking possibly his whole life, his college career, just to explain this and to make it easier for other people to talk about it. That's the stigma. That's bringing down the stigma. So what a way to do it. Both him and the people from the Philippines who, I mean, for speaking out about their stigma, they could be killed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very valuable experience.
Yeah, people really like when you say you're from North Dakota and a thing like that. Did you notice that?
Yeah, they were like, "Oh, North Dakota, wow."
Yeah, I've seemed to get two responses. Either somebody you tell knows one person who is from or has been to or worked in North Dakota, and they tell you about that immediately, and they're really excited, or they don't know anything about anyone who's ever been to North Dakota, and they tell you that immediately, and it's really entertaining. Coming to some of these conferences, I found myself explaining, people assume that it's hard to have a group, a college campus organization called the Psychedelic Club, for example, in a place like North Dakota, because people have this image of North Dakota as being very conservative and stuff like that. So you'd think something called the Psychedelic Club sounds a little risque for people around here. And I'm usually like, sort of embracing that, I guess I say like, sometimes it is hard to talk to people openly about some of these things, but we make a lot of progress, and the city has really impressed me, and I've been just so happy to be a part of, what is going on, and it feels like it's getting better all the time, right? But part of me did and does believe like, it is hard to talk about this stigmatic stuff in North Dakota.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then you meet somebody from the Philippines, and then I'm just embarrassed to say that I'm afraid to talk about stuff here. I mean, okay, maybe there are times where I do feel uncomfortable talking about stigma-related things here because it's kind of a closed-off sort of place sometimes. But nobody's threatened to kill me yet, ever. And so that's really amazing. That is, I found out at this conference, that is an experience that a lot of us in the drug policy reform world have to deal with. Death threats all the time. There was somebody from Iran as well who had to leave his country for the work he was doing. He got so many death threats, he had to leave the country.
Wow.
And he's a college student, like, wow. Thankfully, nobody has threatened to kill me or my friends or to bomb the building we have our meetings in every week. And, that was a big lesson for me to learn. It was realizing we do have it good here in North Dakota.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I should not be as afraid as I thought I was to bring up certain things for conversation. And so long as nobody threatens our lives, it'll be easier to do that.
Yeah.
But, I saw many examples at the conference of humans, young people who went on despite the death threats. So that was a big lesson for me.
Yeah, that was a big thing. Another thing you mentioned was how another thing that really sunk in with you and with me as well throughout those 3 days was sort of the racial roots of the war on drugs and the racial targeting that the war on drugs takes and originally took. And, you could see it. I heard it a lot by Matthew, the guy on your panel, the law enforcement man. And he was saying, a lot of the confidential informants that they would recruit were from black communities and poorer communities, and they were targeted. They were easier to target. They had less resources to, get good lawyers and combat their case and have people represent them and stuff like that. And there's very racial.
Yeah. And, this is something I've heard a lot about in this community. Everybody says that these drug war policies that like really criminalized certain substances starting in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, that it was fueled by racist tendencies. For example, cocaine and crack cocaine, powder cocaine and crack cocaine. These are exactly the same chemical.
Yep, same drug.
Exactly the same substance. They are just administered differently. However, still today, one powdered cocaine is far less of a crime than crack cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And this is because, and it's so well supported, there's so much data explaining this, and I knew that, but hearing it more from people at the conference helped me understand. It's because black communities were using crack instead of powdered cocaine.
Yep.
And it was a way to just put more black people in prison, really. And that's hard to understand. It's hard to, I think people around here have a hard time coming to terms with that. And I'm not sure why, but especially hearing Matthew Fogg explain from the law enforcement's perspective how the drug war policies really, really do target different races very unfairly, that is an explanation as to why this is even happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So Matthew was very interesting. Matthew Fogg. So he was on our panel. He works with this organization called Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is a group formerly known as Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So it's made up of current and former law enforcement people from all kinds of different agencies who are, sort of the same mind as the SSDP people.
Right.
Basically being against the war on drugs, or at least figuring more professionally that the war on drugs is a war on us, humans. And what he has done is very, very interesting, and it makes it a lot easier for me to understand and explain this whole racism thing as it is involved in the war on drugs. Because he said, well, Matthew Fogg is the only person, I'm pretty sure, in the history of our country who has ever sued the Justice Department of the United States and won. And he didn't settle. He was very excited to make us understand that he never settled his lawsuit. He won against them. And what happened was, after 32 years of being a U.S. Marshal, so I learned that the U.S. Marshals are part of the Justice Department. I didn't realize that.
Okay.
I just find that kind of interesting. I was like, okay, yeah. He was a marshal for 32 years, and he worked with confidential informants, and he did a bunch of stuff. He won the highest honor that you can get from certain agencies because he tracked down more than 300 fugitives in his career, and he got a lot of bad dudes, including people who sold drugs, behind bars who were fugitives. So he's had a really storied career as a lawman. But what he did when he retired after 32 years working for the Justice Department, the Marshals, he sued the Justice Department for operating a racially hostile work environment by forcing U.S. deputy marshals to target different races differently, unfairly in their work. And so, I mean, it sounds wishy-washy or something to some people maybe, but he made it very understandable. He's like, yo, when we are gonna plan a bust or a sting or plant undercover operatives somewhere or do anything, if we do it in a fancy white person's neighborhood near DC, they will absolutely get phone calls about it
Right.
from people who are in power saying, you're targeting my family or my friends or my business interests. You cannot do this. And Matthew many times got a call from his boss saying, you must not do that there.
They avoided those rich white neighborhoods because of that.
And there's many, many, many things that they did in the poor black neighborhoods that he said would absolutely never fly in the other neighborhoods.
Right.
And so that helped me understand too, like, that's real,
Yeah.
And there's so much data to look at it to explain how many people are arrested and how many people actually use drugs. And it's still way more people are being targeted. And so this big lawsuit that he led against the Justice Department, it resulted in a multi-million-dollar verdict and all of these I think some policy changes or something. And I mean, he had to prove in this court case that this was happening, and he proved it, and he won, and he refused to settle. And so, I mean, this is all data to suggest that the racial origin of a lot of these drug war policies is really there.
Yeah, sure.
So that was a good lesson for me to learn at the conference too.
Yeah, I'm so glad that was a really rewarding panel to have listened to. That was great. You did a great job organizing that, man.
It was really fun. I was very glad that we got to meet him because I didn't arrange to have him on the panel. Stacia at SSDP contacted LEAP, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, who asked, hey, do you have anybody who could talk about confidential informants? And they just happened to get this guy, Matthew Fogg, who was so cool. And after the panel, so it was... Yeah, our panel was about confidential informants, and we talked about Andrew Sadek and Rachel Hoffman, college students who were coerced to go undercover and do some drug deals to potentially lower their sentences that they might get. And it was really great. I had fun meeting Lance Block. He was the attorney who worked with Andrew Sadek's family and with Rachel Hoffman's family. I think they had a good dynamic, too, between the two of them, Lance and Matthew. Matthew has worked with informants before, so he explained from the law enforcement perspective what policies do they have in place to keep informants safe, and then why that doesn't work all the time. And then Lance sort of giving the more details about Rachel's story and Andrew's story. It was fun. And then we all went out for lunch afterwards, too. That meant a lot to me because we got more time to follow up on what we were doing there. And I think the friendships that we made with each of them, and Neil Franklin, who was there, Major Neil Franklin, he is also affiliated with LEAP. He gave the opening keynote of the whole conference, which was really interesting, by the way. I'd like to ask your opinion on that. He made a big metaphor with the Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And it was an interesting way he sort of framed this war on drugs based on his book. But after our confidential informant panel, it was really cool to go sit with Neil Franklin and Matthew Fogg and Lance Block and our friend Kelsey and you and I, and chatting about the conference. I really appreciated that. Did you have fun at... What was the name of that place? Fadley's? Fadley's. It was in that market, that really old market.
Fadley's, yeah. Fadley's, I think.
Yeah. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, it was. There was...
crab cakes.
Those big jumbo chunk crab cakes. That was delicious.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah. And, wow. I mean, just chatting with them more was really fun because Matthew Fogg... He's got so many stories.
He was funny. He had charisma, and he was just like a great speaker. He had a lot of like fire and passion and animation in the way he was speaking, and also that wonderful perspective of having been there in the law enforcement firsthand, working with CIs. he was definitely a great addition to the panel.
Yeah, I liked his tone, because despite all of these accolades he has, which are really, really amazing. I mean, just his career alone as a law enforcement man is really amazing what he's done. He's got all those fancy awards for tracking down all those fugitives. But then also, like, you just leave it at that for most people and they call it a good career. But the biggest thing on his resume is the fact that he sued the Justice Department and did not settle and won.
Yeah.
And I believe he said he's currently now working on like another lawsuit that he is representing all of the U.S. Marshals or something.
Okay.
I'll need to get the details of that again. But
That'd be great to have him on the show.
absolutely, and he said he would love to be. So
Yeah.
Well, we just gotta call him anytime.
He sounded so open to that, and that would be so great. He has tons of information.
Yes, and stories, and what I liked about his tone is that he's very laid back about it. He's got all these accolades, but when we were walking to Fadley's, whatever that place was called, he's just saying hi to people on the street, and I don't know. He didn't seem to have any kind of ego about him.
Right.
We were just a very real dude and friendly, funny dude. So I was happy to meet him and get the time afterwards as well.
Absolutely. So what else? What were some of the other panels? What was like your favorite panel that you remember? I mean, of course there was yours. That was one of my favorites. Absolutely. What else?
I liked the big ones, where the keynote speeches.
Yeah, sure.
When everybody was in the big same room together. I enjoyed those a lot, including Rick Doblin's talk. So Rick Doblin is the founder and I think the CEO or whatever, executive director or something of MAPS. And so that was cool that he was there, and he told a few personal stories and, of course, about how MAPS is working on making MDMA a medicine for PTSD victims.
Yeah, that was awesome. He shared the actual clip from one of those sessions.
Yeah.
And how it like unfolds, and then he shared the statistics, showing the very promising results of that MDMA and therapy to treat PTSD. Just phenomenal results.
Yeah. That video he played was really, really powerful. So I think we've chatted about it before, but yeah, just to set that up again, what MAPS is doing is they're moving into phase 3 trials now. Last year at the MAPS conference, the conference was on that date to celebrate the fact that they had just finished phase 2. And now they're moving into phase 3 so that more study participants and more cities are involved and all that. What it is so MDMA, this is Molly, or when it's cut with other amphetamines and stuff, it's called ecstasy.
Yeah.
MDMA, people think this is like a party drug, and I mean, basically that is how it's used. But in this therapy, you do it 3 times. So, it's not like another medication therapy where you take it home and you do it when you're at home or something. This MDMA therapy that MAPS is leading, how it works is there's a male and a female therapist team who are sitting with somebody who is diagnosed with PTSD and treatment-resistant PTSD. So they've tried other things that didn't work. And what they do is they did this so scientifically, so there's placebo groups and all this and that, but they give you the medicine and they sit with you for 8 hours or all day, and then 2 weeks go by and then you do it again, and then 2 more weeks go by and you do it again with other non-medicine therapy sessions in between and before and after. And so that video that Rick Doblin shared of one of the PTSD patients laying in bed, undergoing the medicine with the therapist on either side of him, that was really moving. I mean, did you hear how he described what it was doing for him?
Yeah, it was very moving. He was articulating these very powerful and destructive experiences that he had, but he was saying them, and he was remaining calm, and he was observing them and analyzing them in a way that he probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. He was really taking like a deep, hard look inside of himself. It was impressive.
Yeah. my friend James Casey, who founded the Psychedelic Club at the University of Colorado Boulder a few years ago, he participated in the phase 2 PTSD, MDMA, MAPS trials. And he had a very similar experience to, I think, what the guy in the video we saw was having. My friend James, he explained that the MDMA was like a suit of armor that allowed him to walk back into his trauma, back into these memories, and not be afraid and not retreat from them.
Right. Yeah, because what happens a lot of time with things like PTSD or traumatic experiences is repression. You know, those memories and experiences, you don't want to have that recurring in your day-to-day thoughts. So you kind of tuck it down, compartmentalize it, and just try to leave it deep down in there in your mind where you never have to let it surface. But in the case with PTSD, it leaks through that repressive barrier that you try to create. It leaks through. And so, you know, as you mentioned, during these trials, during these therapy sessions, they're able to just open that gate, let those repressive memories in, and just totally analyze them, look at them from every angle.
Yeah, and that was cool. I'm glad he shared that video at the end.
Yeah, the video was awesome.
I was definitely into everything he was saying, but then the video at the end is what I remember most.
Yeah.
I mean, that made me feel things, watching that guy
Yeah.
explain to the therapist. And then he would say something like, I just wanted to tell you guys that.
Yeah, yeah.
like I think this is important. And
Yeah.
they're like, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that was cool.
He's like realizing, he's like, oh, wow, I just realized this.
Yeah.
I think this is important. Let me tell you what I just realized.
Let me tell you that I just imagined I was like locked in a room with myself and I was fighting with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And only instead of fighting him this time, I let him in. And yeah, I that was a really cool video. I was glad he shared that.
Mm-hmm.
And I chatted with Rick, which is cool because he's a big part of the community here, and so it's nice to hear his perspective on some of these things. But what was great when I chatted with him was I was actually talking with Zek. So one person I was very excited to meet at the conference was Zek Hiles. Mm-hmm. Is it Zek Hills?
I think it's Hills. I don't know. I never heard him pronounce his last name.
Me neither.
I couldn't correct you accurately.
Yeah, Zechariah. This is one random day last year, less than a year ago, I guess. He called me, or he sent me a message. He saw us in that Leafly article. So our the UND advisor for the UND Psychedelic Club, Frank White, a sociology professor who teaches drugs in society, our dear homie, he is interviewed in this Leafly news article. You can find it if you type in How Psychedelic Clubs Are Changing Conversation on Campus is the name of the article by Leafly. Our friend Bailey Ron wrote that article. And I'm interviewed in it. Frank's interviewed in it. Somehow, Zek just stumbled upon this article and reached out to me. And he said, I live in Florida, and I want to start a psychedelic club. Mm-hmm. And, can you give me some advice? And so I chatted with him, and I had a nice time talking to him. And the main nugget of knowledge, I guess, I had for him was that what he should do is become an SSDP chapter as well.
Yep.
And because he did that, he did the same thing you did this year, and he was racking up SSDP activity points, and he traded those in to bring himself, and was it one or two other people from his chapter?
It was just the one other person, his vice president.
Cool. He and his vice president came to the SSDP conference, just like we did. Mm-hmm. And it was because he saw this article and reached out, and we connected, and so I knew he was going to be there, and it was wonderful to see him in person.
Yep.
And the first time he and I actually were chatting, something had just ended in the big main room, and everybody was, I think, going off to breakout sessions or something. And finally, I had a moment with him, so we talked for 5-10 minutes or something, and that's when we noticed that Rick Doblin was sitting right there. And so we walked over to him and said, hey, can we say hi? And I told him, James Casey, blah, blah, blah. And Rick Doblin knows James Casey. They had just spoken a few weeks before together at a MAPS fundraiser in Boulder. So I said, my friend James, and, he's the reason I'm here. And you are the reason that he was my reason. So, thanks, hi. Yeah. And it was cool because Zek was really into talking to Rick as well. And we were both excited about that. Whatever. So we were chatting with Rick for a few minutes, and we stood up. and went into the next room, and that's where they had the maps booth and a bunch of the books for sale. And one of the books that I knew I was going to get was the Maps Manual of Psychedelic Support, which is a beautiful printed book with tons and tons and tons of information in it about how to, if you're going to throw a party or a music festival or something, or any kind of situation where people either are going to be using psychedelic drugs, or any other situation where you just want to have a staff of people ready to handle any kind of crisis or emotional breakdown or crisis, stuff like that. It's a really great book that explains what you need to bring to your event and what kind of staff and training you need, and really helpful stuff. Anyway, so we just got done talking to Rick. We went out. We both picked up a copy of this big manual that Maps published. And then Rick came back in and was walking through. And so Zach was like, dude, now's our chance. And he's like, hey, will you sign my book? Yeah. and I wasn't going to ask him because he was obviously like wanting to get out of there. He's like, busy people are always hounding him at this kind of thing. But Zach gave me the courage to say, will you sign my book too?
Yeah, that was nice. Like, he gave like little personalized messages too. Not only did he sign it, but then he gave a little tidbit, some life wisdom and very personalized message as well.
Yeah. So that was cool. And it was my way of meeting Zach as well. And just the fact that he and I helped him get himself organized to end up being there. And he helped me buy that book and ask for Rick's signature. And, it was a group effort, and we had fun. But we met some other people too. Our roommate Rob.
Yeah.
What did you think about Rob?
Yeah, Rob was really cool. First time I met him, we ended up going into this super deep conversation. It got very philosophical. We were talking about money and spirituality and the war on drugs and stuff. I wish I would have recorded the conversation. It was so much. It was one of the deepest conversations I've ever had. But we talked about money and how money represents energy. If you're deficient in money, in some of these like poor neighborhoods with money deficiencies, it represents like a lack of energy. Money can be used as motivation. It can create movement. It can create change and stuff like that. And so we got into this really analytical conversation about obtaining money and directing it, using it as a way to sort of motivate change. It was really, really awesome. I talked about a little bit also about my own personal moral dilemma. Like, at what point do I stop hoarding money? Is there a limit? Is there a certain amount of money I should stop hoarding and amassing money? Or do I continue to amass money? At what point do I put it back into circulation? What do I use it for? And things like that. It was really fun. He was great. And we got a little 3-minute clip about what is harm reduction. Our goal was to ask a few people about what is harm reduction and make sort of a compilation of these different perspectives of harm reduction. And we got a couple. I got Gunnar and Rob. I got a few.
Oh, you interviewed Gunnar?
I did, yes. I didn't do it there. I contacted him afterwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, Gunnar, he was the only other Minnesotan that I stumbled across. I mean, he had a few members from his chapter from Hamline University were there, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
But he was the first person I noticed who was like, hey, you're from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Nice.
He gave the panel the discussion about cryptocurrency and its role in the war on drugs. I wish I would have been able to go to that. I wasn't able to go to that.
Gotcha.
But that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Wow. So it would have been nice maybe to interview everyone there.
Yeah.
What is harm reduction?
Right.
But yeah, we made friends with these people, so we can always call them back.
And we have the itinerary, the book with all the names and stuff, and just reach out over Facebook. It was great. Met a lot of great people. The first panel I went to was a panel about psychedelics, hallucinogens being applied in medicine, sort of the way MDMA is, except they were analyzing things like ibogaine and psilocybin mushrooms, and I believe LSD. I believe they were talking about LSD a little bit, but they were researchers, graduate researchers from Johns Hopkins, undergrad researchers from Johns Hopkins, and it was really cool to see sort of these stigmatized topics being brought into the light in a clinical setting. Like let's research these topics, and they're having good results with that. Johns Hopkins is doing their groundbreaking over there.
Yeah. I got to spend the day after the conference walking around with our friend Kelsey on, she's a student, a chemistry major at Johns Hopkins. And so we were walking around and I met some of her friends. And actually something that happened the very day our conference ended was that the student body at Hopkins were informed that there's currently a bill being considered in the Maryland legislature that would allow universities now there to create new police forces, create their own police force. So as it is now at Hopkins, they just sort of have a security force, you know. They're not actual police officers. They are just security force. At UND, for example, we have a full police department, a campus police department, which all the members of the UPD, they first become full members of the Grand Forks Police Department, and then they have an extra sort of training or swearing in or something. Then once they're a GFPD, then they become, I think I'm remembering this correctly, this is what I was told, then they become a campus, a UPD officer as well.
Okay.
So a lot of colleges, especially private colleges, in Minnesota and elsewhere, you know, don't have a whole police department just for their campus. They have a security force who will call the cops if something is going on that they need the cops for. Apparently at Hopkins, the very day of our drug policy conference, they were informed, you know, they were told, students, we as Hopkins are supporting this bill, and when it passes, we are going to create a private police force, and it's going to partner with the Baltimore Police Department, and this is what we're doing. Well, the students were very upset about this because it wasn't framed as a discussion, you know.
Oh.
It wasn't like, hey, should we have a forum to ask if we should start a new police or start our own private campus police department? It wasn't an open invitation. It was, we are informing you about what's going on. So the very next day, I was on campus and there was a protest, and like 100 students, or maybe 300, I forget the number. There was some articles done about it from the student newspaper and from the local Fox station in Baltimore. There's a protest, and these students were like, you can't just spring this on us. Like, you need to at least ask our opinion if this is a good idea or not. The university apparently has been thinking about this for a while and is probably lobbying for this bill to pass in the state so that they can do it. That's what they said in their message. We're trying to make this bill pass so that we as Hopkins can create a police department. And so the students were very upset about that. And I thought it was very interesting timing because Hopkins itself is doing some of the best research on other drug-related things like you were just talking about. They have psilocybin research going on. I mean, as far as I knew, I thought nobody was allowed to do that in our country because these substances are illegal. So that's why none of them have been researched in a very great way. What I learned at the MAPS conference last year, and more so every day, is that some researchers have managed, despite all the odds, to find a way to legally, scientifically study this stuff. So it's funny that Hopkins is, on one hand, leading the world, part of the world, in research on some of these substances to better inform drug policies, whereas also the very weekend of the conference in Baltimore, they inform their student body that they're creating a new police department that will, you know, to their mind, unfairly execute some of these drug policies on their campus. And the students are worried that having police are going to lead to more problems instead of solving more problems. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Is the university thinks this is going to solve their problems, right, and the students think it's going to make problems worse. So there's a lot of discussion that needs to go on before they just decide one way or the other. So that's why the students were mad that it was just sprung on them. And I think since then they've had something of a forum where the administration was there answering questions, and I've only heard about it from our friend Kelsey. She said that students asked really good questions and that the responses seemed lackluster from the administration. She got the impression that it was all for show and that they weren't really listening.
Okay.
Who knows? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But the timing of all that was very interesting. And I learned a thing or two about Hopkins. And I think they should call Matthew Fogg.
Yeah.
Because he lives there.
Yeah, that'd be good.
What else about this conference struck you as really important?
Well, jumping back to that panel discussion about capitalism, what came to mind just now was this great analogy that the guy arguing in favor of capitalism was making. He was arguing, in favor of capitalism, obviously, but he was also kind of denouncing the war on drugs as an anti-capitalistic principle, in the sense that capitalism is essentially founded on the idea of a free market. Free being the key word in that term, free market. In other words, if I have a bunch of eggs and somebody else has a bunch of cannabis and I want to trade my eggs for his cannabis, in a free market, if we both walk away happy and we both consent to making that trade, under capitalistic principles, it isn't the government's duty to step in a trade like that. That was one of the biggest takeaways. That was one of the things I could understand about that panel, and that was pretty big. I was like, yeah, that's true. Capitalism, free market. That's a free market idea. I really liked the sentiment that was echoed throughout the conference, that the war on drugs, as it is right now in its current form, is not working. It's not sustainable. It's counterproductive, and it should end, at least in one way or another.
And yeah, I think it also comes down to, maybe this is what all political conversations really come down to, is most people have the same values here. Mm-hmm. We all live in the same country or the same community, whatever. We are interested in everyone's well-being as much as possible. Mm-hmm. We just seem to have wildly different ideas about how we're going to achieve that.
Right. And
when it comes to the drug war policies and stuff, this example at Hopkins, they're either, is more police officers working with the Baltimore Police Department going to solve the problem, or is, changing policies in an opposite sort of way?
Yeah.
Would that be best? And I don't know how we all disagree. I'm making some connections to my my wildlife biology classes at UND. We talked a lot about the human dimensions of managing wildlife populations, and people have wildly different opinions on what we ought to do to preserve all these natural resources. But there's a sort of value system. Like, we share these deep values, but actions and behaviors sort of down the line can be very different, even though we share the same values. And I guess that's sort of a common sense sort of comment to be making about this. But I wonder how we will communicate better and find more ways to allow everybody to be free, and to some people take like a safe injection site, for example. Mm-hmm. There are cities in Canada, and I don't think there are any in the United States yet, who have a safe injection site. It's something we've talked about in Grand Forks before as a community, where drug users can come in and use their substances with doctors around them. And so there's been no overdose deaths recorded at any legit safe injection facility in the world because they have support there. Now, some people will say that this is bad, and some people will say this is good.
Right.
And I guess it's just a matter of opinion.
Like,
it seems obvious, but I don't know.
I see what you're getting at. Like,
there's data and stuff that can better inform your opinion. Mm-hmm. In a community that has one of these, do you have fewer deaths? Do you have fewer drug addictions? Do you spend less money on other treatment or recovery resources? and then you're supposed to take all this data and inform your opinion with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the fear in people that oppose things like safe injection sites is that you're going to increase the rates of addiction. You're going to encourage drug use and things like that. But there were posters all around this conference, and they really resonated with me, basically stating support, don't punish. Support, don't punish. And that's something that really resonated with me. That's something that I think will work, and that's sort of what these safe injection sites have to offer is support as opposed to punishment. And as well as when a person is at one of those safe injection sites, they can get resources to help them recover.
I wished that there was even more discussion at the conference about tone, and how can we bridge the people who share the same values. How can we, get them to emphasize those and not so much just the behaviors or actions on the bottom of it that are, can be very divisive.
Yeah, they could have almost had an entire discussion, an entire panel about tone. Like you mentioned at the beginning, when Neil was opening, you were asking about the tone. Yeah, he sort of framed like our group as a war on the war on drugs.
Yeah,
and we were a little bit critical, a little bit reluctant to adopt that idea, just furthering another team for war,
right?
Essentially,
right?
And it seems like so semantic. It seems so minute of a detail that it shouldn't matter, but it really does. If you frame something as a war, suddenly you're at battle. You have two sides that are in opposition. One has to win. One has to overcome the other, and that is what results in a lot of hostility. I think it would be better to frame something like that as a collaboration, coming together. How do we bring our two teams together instead of framing it as a war?
In the meantime, why don't we leave everybody with a open-ended, interpret this however you want after the comment we just made, but let's end it with the same way that they started most of the panels. Do you remember?
How was that?
The war on drugs
is a war on us.
That's right. Well, thank you, Cal. That is the harm reduction report for this week. We have lots more to talk about, so find us on the Sandbagger News YouTube channel or the UND Psychedelic Club Facebook page. This has been your pal, Cal.
With Willard TeaBelly.
Thanks, y'all, for tuning in.
Thanks.
Sandbag on.
Sandbag on.